Hello and welcome to Conversations. I'm Jim Below, the host, and I'm very pleased to have joining me today Washtenaw County Sheriff Jerry Clayton. Welcome back to Conversations.
Thanks, Jim. Glad to be back.
And you are now in your middle of your third term, so you've been the sheriff for 10 years. How has the county changed? How has your role as sheriff changed in those 10 years?
It's a good question. When we took office, we were right at the beginning of that economic downturn. Okay. So everything was around cutting budget and cutting services. And, you know, the previous few years had been a challenge to the sheriff's office in terms of maintaining budget and trying to figure out organizational culture, what kind of service we're going to deliver. Now we're at a point where, you know, just last year, the residents of Washtenaw County, the voters, passed a 8-year, $1 million millage, public safety, mental health. And from a police services standpoint, that gives some stability to contract policing. So we're in a much better economic and budgetary position, but it's still a challenge.
Well, in looking at that economic shift or change over your 10 years, when you became sheriff, do you recall how many total deputies and personnel within the department? I would say not counting, let's say, the jail, because that's a separate sort of entity. But as far as operational, what most people would consider the sheriff's department.
Well, if you're just looking at road patrol, we're pretty much the same.
Okay.
So when you look at total number of contract deputies, those have stayed pretty consistent. The growth in the sheriff's office, quite frankly, has happened in other areas. When we assumed responsibility, when we took office, we were asked to take responsibility for emergency management, which obviously responds in hazmat, tornadoes, things of that nature, and also responsibility for community corrections. And if you recall, the sheriff's office and the county were just completing a pretty substantial expansion of the jail, which required additional staff.
It's been 10 years at that point?
It's been 10 years, yeah. So in this totality, we've probably grown 22%.
Okay.
So it's quite a bit staff.
But as you say, much of that growth has been associated with the expansion of the jail, and then other services that you've assumed responsibility for.
Well, the other big one too I just want to add is Metro Dispatch. So when we assumed responsibility for the sheriff's office, when I took office, we probably had a total of 15 staff in Metro Dispatch. And we dispatched maybe for 70% of the county 911 calls. Now we have over 40 staff assigned to Metro Dispatch, and we handle 93% of the emergency calls in Washtenaw County. So that's been the largest area of growth from a percentage standpoint in the office.
You mentioned 93% of the county that you're responsible for the emergency contacts. What area still tries to do it on their own, you might say?
So Chelsea PD has its own dispatch center, so does Saline, and so does Milan, and then both university police agencies have their own dispatch centers.
So you've expanded both because of economics allows you, but also because the responsibilities have shifted.
Well, mostly because of economics. So early on, time I was in office, the city of Ypsilanti came to the county and the sheriff's office, and they were having some budgetary challenges, and they asked that we could assume responsibility. Several years after that, we had the very similar conversation with the city of Ann Arbor. And I think it's safe to say we save the city of Ann Arbor somewhere between $750,000 and $1 million a year just in dispatch services.
In handling the 911 calls.
That's right.
That's right.
And we know at the end of the day, people don't care who's handling the call. They just want you to handle the call right and make sure the first responder gets to their situation on time.
You mentioned that a year ago that the voters of the county approved a special millage dealing with both mental health and with
public safety.
Mm-hmm. How has that, or has it been instituted yet? Has it, have the taxes started to be collected? Where does that stand, and where does it look like it's going to move forward?
So good question. Just really quick in how that was structured. So there were 3 parts to it. 38% of what was collected, which will just be initially just under $16 million, will go for mental health. So some of that is the community and mental health, and to stabilize, to do prevention, diversion from jail, those type of things.
And that is done by the county mental health department.
That's right.
Coordinated, I won't say it's done.
Coordinated, that's right. And most of the services delivered by our Washtenaw County Community Mental Health. And I think the last time we were here, Director Cortez was here. We talked about our partnership. So the other 38% goes to public safety. So the intent of that is to continue supporting the public safety services, mostly through police contracts, but also through a lot of the support operations that make that possible. But also a part of that is to support our continued interaction and partnership with community mental health. We have a very robust partnership with them. They are our contract service provider in the jail. And really what we're looking at is this. So let's go and get as far upstream as possible. Let's identify people with severe mental illness that have challenges, and let's try to get them the services on the front end. From a county-wide perspective, this comprehensive approach, which will take our two major healthcare systems, our nonprofit service providers. Let's get everybody in the room and talk about what that strategy looks like. But we know,
has that been going on? And you know, is the millage going to help defray cost of what some of their programs? Is that the idea?
Yeah. So the collaboration, we've been sitting around talking about it
Yeah.
for a long period of time, and there's been some collaboration, right? But it hasn't been as comprehensive as we would hope. And oftentimes, when we look at what we really want to do, there's not the financial resources to support that. Now, the millage will help support some of that, but we're trying to be really, really clear to people that the millage, it wasn't the silver bullet for mental health. That they'll out of that 38%, they'll get maybe $5.86 million. That's enough to start some programs, support some programs, but it's not enough to address the tremendous challenge that we're having in our county and in other counties across the country. I mean, across the state and across the country. You know, the challenge is simply this: the state's got to step up too. You know, and the state has, over the last decade, 2 decades, really disinvested in support for mental health. And it has fallen on the locals to figure out strategies and to pony up the money to do it. So the millage helps in that regard. Other 38%, as I said, goes to public safety and supporting that. And then there was 24% that went to the municipalities to have their own police departments. Now, the millage could not dictate how those dollars were spent. So each one of those areas decided they were going to
I know
spend
in Ann Arbor, we've talked about how they were planning on using that. And that's to sort of, because they have their own police force, and the public safety portion of the millage goes to the county sheriff.
That's right.
Which, well, I won't say you don't get involved in what goes on in the city, but that collaboration is different and it's more costly to the city, and so they get reimbursed for some of that.
That's exactly right. I mean, could we spend more time in the cities? Well, sure we could, but that's a waste of resources.
Yeah.
So the city of Ann Arbor has a fine police department. We work collaboratively with them a lot.
You're right.
But yeah, part of the design of that millage was to help offset some of the costs that the residents of Ann Arbor are already paying for public safety.
When we talked about the millage prior to the vote a year ago, you mentioned that the cost of providing deputies to the various townships that have contracts, the cost had been going up.
Right.
But what had been charged the counties had remained stable for the most part.
For the most part, yeah.
And so one of the ideas was what percent or what portion of the millage that's collected goes to support the deputies that are being, you could say, contracted within the various townships?
It's a good question. So the way we have it mapped out, 38% of the total millage comes to the sheriff's office. And about 50% of that 38% goes towards supporting contract policing.
Okay.
So
to defray the extra
that's right.
costs of the county. So
right.
the townships don't have to deal with it because they can't deal with it either.
That's exactly
downtown.
right. So without the millage, we had 3 choices. Stop providing contract policing in the county, which I think would have been a disaster, would have been wrong. Push off all new costs to our contracting partners. They can't afford it.
Yep.
Or the county now redirect more general fund dollars to support public safety, which means you can't support other important things.
At the expense
That's
of
exactly
maybe the
right.
mental health or
That's right.
other
other
costs.
services that the county is mandated to provide, and they choose to provide to increase quality.
The other half then goes where? Because you said about half of
That's
the
right.
tax dollars goes to support the contracts.
So as we started to look at diverting people with mental health from the jail, where do we put some of those dollars? So remember I said before, when we took office, we also took responsibility for community corrections. So community corrections is a big part of diverting, keeping people out of jail, alternatives to incarceration. So we're going to dedicate some additional resources there, hire some more staff with a mental health focus in mind. Those that end up in the jail have to be managed. So we're going to create a mental health unit within the jail
Okay.
that we will staff with a person that's part sheriff's office, part mental health to help support in that regard. And there's some other initiatives.
Yeah.
And I'll add another big piece that was a little controversial for those that did not understand. Our Metro Dispatch, which is now housed in the city of Ann Arbor above their fire station,
Okay,
was
yeah.
always supposed to be temporary. Now we're going to move to a county location on Zeeb Road. And we're going to combine Metro Dispatch with emergency management and make it an emergency communications center. And that's the future for not only Washtenaw County, but different counties.
And so the idea there is that by having the dispatch and the emergency, you can better coordinate.
That's right.
And not by the emergency, you're dealing with what, the ambulances, contracts, and all the different forms, you might say, of emergency needs.
Well, sure, hazmat. So if there's a spill, if there's a severe, so the biggest emergency management challenge we have in this county is weather.
Okay.
So severe weather, our emergency management is responsible for coordinating the response to that, getting the information out to citizens. When the tornado happened in Dexter, it was emergency management that helped coordinate that response, not only police, but fire and EMS.
Right.
So making sure that those two entities are under one roof, coordinating resources, just makes sense. We're also going to work with the Road Commission. And the Road Commission, our plan is to have Road Commission be able to pipe in access to their cameras countywide into the dispatch center. So it's not like our dispatchers will be monitoring it 24/7, but in the event that there's a critical incident and there are Road Commission cameras that can provide us real-time eyes on a location,
Right.
it really just enhances our ability to get the right first responders to the location in the most efficient and effective method.
Well, we're going to take a short break, come back and look at some of the large issues facing you as the sheriff, but also police in general for the county and Southeast Michigan. Ask your viewers to stay with us. We'll be back in just a moment.
CTN Sports, bringing local sports to you.
Hi, my name is Natalia Tejeda, and you can catch community programming on channel 16, 17, 18, and 19.
Hello and welcome back to Conversations. Speaking today with Sheriff Jerry Clayton of Washtenaw County. And one of the issues that sort of has been ongoing, and you hear more and more, is the opioid crisis and how you deal with an issue which doesn't contain itself to boundaries and borders. So what you do as a sheriff is, I would think you have to coordinate with all of Southeast Michigan and beyond.
Right.
What is the county doing in dealing with some of those types of crises?
So there's no easy solution to it. I mean, obviously this is a national crisis. So we try to do prevention through education, hitting all different age groups. So it's the young folks, the middle-aged folks, it's seniors in terms of making sure that they understand what prescription medication, which is oftentimes how young folks get exposed to opioids. Getting rid of your old prescription medication, giving them a way to get rid of it. We have red barrels all throughout the county where people can come in and dispose of their medication. There is the enforcement piece. So we're part of a number of different collaborations where we're finding the people that are peddling this stuff and trying to get it off the street. And there's the recovery piece. And part of the recovery piece and the prevention is to destigmatize substance use disorder, to decriminalize substance use disorder, to get people to come out of the shadows and not being ashamed of being addicted, and then getting the kind of treatment they need to get them on the right track. And the last thing I'll add too is not just education of the community, but there's been this strong education of physicians.
Right.
So remember, there was a time where physicians were really getting criticized for poor pain management.
Yes.
And they were encouraged to prescribe medication. But now we're seeing the consequences of that strategy. So now physicians are being trained to help their patients manage their pain differently, and understanding the impact and how quickly someone can be addicted to opioids.
This is unlike some of the issues in the past, decade or so dealing with drugs. Often people begin, you could say, dependence on opioids as a result of a not an illness but an injury or something that required hospitalization or at least some type of, as you say, prescribed medicine to deal with pain. And so it wasn't that you were going into it with the intent or even the thought that you were going to become addicted.
That's right.
But, as you mentioned, in working with physicians so that they recognize
That's right.
when a patient potentially needs to be looked at in a different way concerning that.
That's right. So, education of the physician, and then the physician educating the patient that's receiving that prescription. And if it's a young person, educating the parents in terms of what to watch for. And really for us to be a lot more thoughtful and deliberate in how those medications are prescribed, how we manage the medication when that person's injury is over and there's excess medication, how do we get rid of it? So again, it's one of those things, if it was an easy fix, we would have done it a long time ago. But it requires the community to really develop that comprehensive strategy to enact it and sustain it long term.
And you mentioned that you have the illegal, selling of some of the drugs, sometimes obtained by people who had gotten the prescription legitimately.
Right.
But they find out there's more value in turning around and selling it.
That's right.
And so then you have that might be considered the criminal aspect of it.
So you got the criminal aspect of it with prescription medication. But what we really know is now the prescription medication on the market is a lot more expensive. So what do people go right to? Heroin. So they're going right to heroin. It's cheap. It's easy to get. It's all over the county, all over the state, all over the country. So people don't have to look far for it. It's being mixed. And, they make more money by mixing it with things like fentanyl and carfentanil, which is potent to the point where the carfentanil is an animal tranquilizer.
Okay.
That is so potent that from an enforcement standpoint, our staff have to be really careful in handling those kind of drugs, that they can absorb it through the skin. We've had that happen on a number of occasions and put the law enforcement officers at risk. The other thing, for people that are overdoses, we've had the naloxone. We've had it now for 18 months, almost 2 years, probably saved close to 100 lives.
Just in Washtenaw County?
Just the sheriff's office.
Okay.
And there are other agencies that now have it, that they're saving their own lives. So we've seen, all the stats are still point to the fact that this is continuing to increase. Emergency room visits, overdoses, death by overdose. We have not wrapped our minds around the best strategy to start to reverse the tide. And that's something we'll continue to focus on now and into the future.
A second issue, which has once again been a national and local concern, deals with a police department or a sheriff's department's interaction with the community, often as a result of a confrontation or a shooting by a police officer of a citizen. What kind of training do sheriff deputies receive in Washtenaw County in an effort to, help them learn how to best deal with certain situations?
Good question. I'll try to be as concise as possible. We started 10 years ago. And what we really started on is let's change the culture of our organization. Let's change the basic assumptions about who we are, what our role is, and how do we interact with people. The fact that we should interact treating people with dignity and respect. It doesn't make us less safe, doesn't make us soft in crime. I get frustrated from a societal standpoint when we try to make that an either-or proposition. Right? You either got to be hard and all these things, or you got to be disrespectful. No, you can accomplish both. Oh yeah, and by the way, we should always work on the relationship with the community. Work on a relationship with the community built on trust and understanding and alignment of expectations when something critical hasn't happened, not after the fact. If we do it after the fact, we've lost. So that, from an organizational standpoint, is the direction that we lay out for staff to change organizational culture. The training and the policy is aligned. We have a bias-free policing policy. We have a policy. We just redid our subject control use of force policy. Within that,
Meaning what?
How do you respond to resistive behavior?
Okay.
So whether it's a physical takedown, taser, firearms, when someone resists behavior, they're not following your lawful orders. Right. There's a continuum of responses that you can have to that. Right. So that really that's governed by a number of different laws. It's governed by the use of force continuum, all of those things. So we rewrote all of that, and it's really solid and comprehensive. But one of the things that we added is like a preamble, a value statement on the front end, that we value all human life. Right. That when our staff come in contact with someone, even if they're suicidal and all these other things, the result shouldn't be anybody's physical, emotional, psychological harm. So that it doesn't mean, again, that we're compromising safety, but that's our mindset.
One of the issues seems to be situations where the officer or the deputy almost assumes that there is a threat. In other words, they assume a person may have a weapon, assume that they are potentially in danger themselves. How do you train, how do you work with officers to not necessarily assume the worst, but because of situations nationally in the last 2 or 3 years, you have to be careful not to assume the worst also?
Well, sure. They should always proceed with officer safety in mind, right? So I'm always going to have the basic assumption. I don't know what that person has. So I'm going to position myself, I'm going to interact with the assumption that that person may pose a threat, they may have a weapon. Doesn't mean I have to talk to you, treat you bad, disrespect you. It doesn't mean any of those things. So again, there's a balance. I can call you sir, ma'am, interact with you, and really what I'm looking for and responding to is your behavior. So not who you are. I shouldn't make assumptions based on the color of your skin, your gender, or what I think you believe, any of those things. Because matter of fact, if I react based on those assumptions, it makes me less safe, it makes you less safe. If I go with the basic assumption that at any time this person could be a threat, and I position myself that way until I find out something different, but I do it in a way that treats you with basic human and dignity and respect, it goes a long way. So that's part of what we train our staff on.
I believe it was maybe more than a year or two ago, and it may not have been the sheriff's department, but I want to say in Ypsilanti there was a situation, and there was the beginning of sort of neighborhood or community meetings with the sheriff's department. Or maybe it wasn't with the sheriff's, but I guess my question is, what specifically have you done in trying to work with neighborhood organizations without having to wait for an incident to occur?
Well, again, we meet with neighborhoods all the time. So we did a number of what we call community education sessions. So you're right. We went all over the county talking about different topics with different communities in our neighborhood watch groups. We have conversations with folks around a number of things in terms of aligning expectations. We've done what we call impact workshops. So those are enhancing police and community trust workshops, where we bring police officers and community members together just in a dialogue around what our expectations are in relationship. We do what's called just cause sessions. So those are more intimate conversations with a few of our deputies and young people to try to bring them together over a meal, really just trying to engage in dialogue. And our expectation is we don't just have one or two people or it's a program. It is part of organizational culture. Jim, we don't have enough time, but I could tell you the number of times our deputy sheriffs that are doing patrol have also organized picnics in the neighborhood, community events in the neighborhood. So we don't believe that you're either fighting crime or engaging the community. We believe that we build strong and sustainable communities through our engagement with the community. And every time we're out on the street, we should be working to build a good relationship.
I would say, and in certain respects, because you have such a large geographic region, the whole county, it's not like having foot patrols in downtown Ann Arbor, or being able to set up, sort of neighborhood precincts per se, where you can get to know the neighbors and they get to know a given officer or deputy.
So, well, to that regard, we have community stations, and we deliver the services. They look a little different. So our expectation, and our deputies step up to the plate all the time, is when they're in Manchester, they get out of the car, they walk around, and they just have casual conversations. It's the same expectation we'll have in West Willow or Superior Township. They get out of the car, they engage people when they talk, and sometimes it's just, hi, how you doing? And sometimes it's around a problem that's in the neighborhood, and they're talking to the business owner or the neighbors around how do we collaborate to identify the problem and put a long-term solution.
Being able to get to the neighbors and talk with the people is different than getting the community leaders who are not the ones that you're likely going to interact with in a potential situation.
That's right. It's a little bit of both. So sometimes the community leaders are the elected people, or sometimes from the clergy, but the people we want to make connections with all the time are the people that live in the houses, live in the apartments, the ones that our deputies come in contact with every day. And our deputies actually do a really, really good job of doing that.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon and updating us on your department and what's been going on.
I appreciate giving the opportunity to share a little bit about what we're doing in the Sheriff's Office.
Well, I want to thank you again and thank you for your service. I want to wish our viewers good luck during this fall season and look forward to your continued support here on Conversations. Thank you.